You mentioned the judiciary, and Leonard Leo, I think, is a really important name in this regard. We've been hearing just like this weird conservative talking point that I think a majority of Americans have no idea what they're referring to lately about how the FBI is discriminating against Catholics. And I think that, to me, at least here in the United States, it feels very push by these wealthy donors like Leonard Leo, who are trying to tamp down any kind of investigation into these reactionary Catholic groups. Who can you talk about his role, and then also how that plays into former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, Amy Coney Barrett right now, where his tentacles kind of are?
No, absolutely. It's a tried and tested tactic. And, Opus Dei have used this tactic for many years. And this is a favorite tactic of Leonard Leo, to basically use religion as a shield, as something, something to hide behind, when what's really going on here is a political agenda, a political program that they're pushing through, a radical political program and so they use the Catholicism as something to hide behind. And certainly in the last few weeks since the book's come out, I've been labeled by Opus Dei itself and by many kind of trolls on Twitter as an anti-Catholic bigot. But it's kind of it's lazy, because it fails to grapple with the very serious allegations that are making in the book. Now, just to come back to Leonard Leo, I mean, he's a critical figure in all of this. So officially, he isn't a member of Opus Dei, but certainly the circles are very much intertwined. So he is a director on the board at this institution that's called the Catholic Information Center, which is the main Opus Dei hub in central DC. This place on 15th Street, on K Street, near 15th Street, and this place over the years, it's run by Opus Dei. There's a bunch of Opus Dei priests there who celebrate Mass, take confession, but who also give spiritual guidance to these big figures like Leonard Leo. So Leonard Leo's on the board. We've had other big conservative hitters like Bill Barr, Pat Cipollone, who have also been on the board there at the Opus Dei Center in Central Washington. And also, I mean, we do know as well that, to bring things very much up to current events and the election, Kevin Roberts, who's the president of the Heritage Foundation and the architect of Project 2025, he's a regular at the CIC. He gets his spiritual direction from the Opus Dei priests there. And so, over the past 20 years or so, this center, it's basically just a small chapel and bookshop. But it's so much more than that. It's become a real hub for a group of radical conservative Catholics and the people around them. It's almost become a kind of rallying point and a place where they go to, I guess, get spiritual justification for the radical agenda that they want to push through.
Well, let's go back in the history of the CIC and talk about John McCloskey. And then, and once we cover that, then we'll go into sort of the trafficking side of this, which is also sort of incredibly disturbing. But the names, I mean, you mentioned Bill Barr, you mentioned Cipollone, Novak, Robert Bork, Larry Kudlow, he was Opus Dei. Newt Gingrich, is he Opus Dei as well? I mean, Laura Ingraham was converted. It's unclear as if she was Opus Dei, but Pat Cipollone converted her. Ginny Thomas, Scalia. I mean, Alfred Regenery, who is the publisher, where all of like the woman who recorded, I can't remember her name now, Lucienne Goldberg, was it, that or what worked at Regenery, and she got the one to record Monica Lewinsky when Bill Clinton was taken down. You've mentioned Leonard Leo. I mean, we could keep going on, and maybe we will a little bit, but let's go back. Tell us about McCloskey, because it's stunning. You talk about 3,000 Opus Dei members in America. That's an extraordinary small amount of people, and that a third of them live in D.C., and that we can rattle off the names of a dozen people that everybody listening to the show knows, and that's impressive. And this is, and all these people are converts to Opus Dei, right? Like is anybody born Opus Dei really at this amongst at least in America?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can be born into an Opus Dei family, but I get it's a personal choice whether or not you as a child continue, you actually kind of sign up officially to the movement. So a number of those people that you mentioned there are members. Some of them are just what I would call affiliates, people who maybe get spiritual direction without being a full member, but are very much part of this Opus Dei orbit. But, right from the start, the target, the mission, you might say, for Opus Dei operatives in DC has been to penetrate the corridors of power, whether that's in politics or the judiciary or journalism, whatever it might be. And they've very successfully done that. So I think through the first few decades, they started out in Washington in the 1950s. And for the first few decades, they kind of had like piecemeal successes. I mean, Antonin Scalia was one, very big success. In the 1980s, he became a regular at the Opus Dei retreats that it was holding just outside of DC. And a number of kind of big kind of conservative figures were also kind of there, but it was just a small group. But what really changed things was the appointment of this priest, this very charismatic priest called Father C. John McCloskey in the late 1990s. So this guy had been allocated to Princeton University. Opus Dei also targets all of the Ivy League universities because the kids there that's tomorrow's elite. So you might as well recruit them while they're young, because when they go on to become big figures in politics or business or whatever, you've already got them. So he was first asked to do a job at Princeton University, but he really ran up against the student population there, and there were all kinds of protests, and he eventually was booted out. He was kind of too radically conservative for the student population there and for the university itself. So then he was appointed to take over the CIC in the late 90s, and he really made a huge success of it. I mean, he converted a number of really big figures. I mean, some of the people that you've just named there, others like, people like Sam Brownback, who was a senator at the time, and so many others. And he really transformed the CIC into a hub for these radically politicized senators and Congress people, lawyers who, and it became kind of like the central node in this network. And it was really helping to connect these people to really push forward this agenda. And he was doing so well until, and this happens many times in the church, until he was embroiled in a sexual abuse scandal in 2003. One of the regulars at the CIC accused him of having effectively groped her and sexually harassed her. When Opus Dei found out about this, they shipped him off to London so that he couldn't be served with legal papers. Meanwhile, they settled the allegations with this woman for $1 million. They paid her off $1 million. They brought him back and posted him to Silicon Valley. But he was a real critical figure in terms of, I guess, elevating Opus Dei to this kind of next level in Opus Dei. And what we see today, I think, is very much thanks to the foundations that were built by Father C. John.
I am sure that was a one-off, and he never again groped anyone or had done that before, because that's usually the way it works. It's just a one-time situation. One of the things that I remember that I find also fascinating, aside from like all of the hyper conservative tradcon that we would now call it, I guess, of values, that you can hear J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel, who is not Catholic, espouse, though. I mean, this is their milieu. The quote of how McCloskey converted Sam Brownback, and we should remind people, Brownback went from being a senator to governor of Kansas, where he then, after Arthur Laffer's advice, cut all the taxes. It destroyed the revenue for Kansas, so much so that the Republican-controlled legislature had to raise taxes. They wanted to get Brownback out of the picture enough that they made him ambassador to religion or faith, I think it was, under the Trump administration, literally. But the conversation between McCloskey and Brownback really gives you insight into their perspective on democracy. Like this, the hierarchy you see within the context of Catholicism is sort of, I mean, I hate to say on steroids because it's so sort of like trite, but it really is in many respects. I mean, they're only interested in the elite of society, not of society. They're targeting them, and because they know these are the people who are going to run things, but also because they feel like these are the people who should run things. And will you tell us that quote about democracy when he was talking about constituents, I think it was?
So McCloskey, I think he went over to the Senate one day and he was having a chat with a group of senators who were either already members of Opus Dei or people who he was trying to recruit. And he went around the room and said, okay, so can you tell me how many constituents each of you have? And they went around and one said 5 million, the other one said 8 million, another one said 12 million. And McCloskey said, no, you're all wrong. You all only have one constituent, and that's the guy upstairs. That's God. And so it's this kind of imbuing in them this attitude that they're not there to serve the people. The democratic mandate that they have is just a vehicle to which they use to push through this kind of this divine agenda, or this agenda that they're being told is coming from God.
Tell us about so this is their sort of like, to the extent that we can sort of really see it, their aspirational sort of agenda in the context of politics, at least in the context of American politics. The history of like these hospitality schools, like what is going on here? Will you walk us through that? It's sort of nuts.
So, I mean, we were saying earlier that Opus Dei targets the elite, and that's very much true. And the vast majority of its members are these, people in positions of power. But the organization in the 1940s, the founder of the organization, I should say, decided that they wanted to, I guess, create a more home environment in these residences where the celibate members of Opus Dei live, and in the university residences where they're trying to recruit tomorrow's elite. And so they were already spending all of this money on all of these domestic workers, these cooks, cleaners, and the rest of it. And the founder decided it would be a great idea to recruit these domestic workers, and they were all women, into the movement. So he created this new subclass. So in addition to all of the elite members, he decided that he would create this new subclass of membership specifically for the female domestic workers. And
what did they call it? Did they have a name?
They initially called it they were called numeri servants. But I guess in the 60s, they kind of realized that the PR on that wasn't maybe great. So they renamed it they're now called the numeri assistants. And over the years, as women around the world have, wanted better opportunities for themselves and have seen that they can do, the opportunities have opened up, and women, quite rightly want to do whatever job they want. It's become harder and harder to recruit this subclass of membership. So what Opus Dei has done is begin to set up these, what they call hospitality schools, in poor regions of the world, in places like Argentina, Nigeria, the Philippines. And what happens there, and we've seen this recently in Argentina, there was federal prosecutors have filed official accusations against Opus Dei. What they did was they would go out to extremely impoverished villages. They would go door to door knocking on the houses. They would be accompanied sometimes by an Opus Dei priest. And they would say, your daughters, there are no opportunities for them here in the little village. The schools are terrible. Why don't you send your daughters back with us? And we're talking here about girls who were 12, 13 years old. Why don't you send them back with us to the big city, and we will train them in the ways of hospitality. They can work towards a qualification. They can, it will be a path to a better life. And these girls, once they're taken away from their families, away from their friends, they're living on their own, hundreds of miles away from home. It's then when the kind of, they're bombarded, they're pressured and coerced into joining Opus Dei as these numeri servants and numeri assistants. And they're expected to work 14-hour days. Many of them work for no pay whatsoever. They aren't allowed to go out onto the street on their own, unaccompanied. And if Opus Dei decides that they're needed in another part of the world, the girls are trafficked to other parts of the world. And just a few weeks ago, in Argentina, federal prosecutors brought these formal accusations accusing Opus Dei, and specifically the four senior priests in the country, of having trafficked these teenage girls over the course of decades. Now, I know from my reporting that what was happening in Argentina wasn't a one-off. These schools are all around the world, across the Americas, in Africa, Asia, Europe. And, I'm pretty sure that this is just the tip of the iceberg. I think this could be the next big scandal to hit the church. And I guess it's not a church-wide problem. This is a very specific Opus Dei problem. But I think this is going to be a huge scandal over the next few years as more of these women come forward, and as more prosecutors and authorities around the world begin to look into this issue and press charges against Opus Dei.
All right, lastly, like within the context of our government now, I mean, obviously Leonard Leo controls a $1.5 billion fund, I think it is now, where he just simply takes the interest around $200 million a year and injects it into our political system without having to touch his principal, I guess. And I think that came from some type of, I can't remember which entrepreneur billionaire left him like a factory essentially, or a business that he, in trust. Leonard Leo, obviously the most influential, I think, adjacent, Opus Dei adjacent. But talk to us a little bit about J.D. Vance, to the extent that you, he's not necessarily a central focus of your reporting, but he's converted Catholic in the past 4 or 5 years, to my knowledge, and seems to have like all of the sort of the boxes checked in terms of Opus Dei. How do you have any sense of how Opus Dei adjacent he is?
So he converted in 2019. And I think, the world of Leonard Leo and Kevin Roberts has become so dominant in Republican politics over the past few years, partly because of all of this money that's sloshing around, and the way that Leo uses the money to fund, various initiatives using kind of, these dark money networks and nonprofits. It's hard to trace where the money's coming from and who's behind it all. But, I think it's become I'm sure J.D. Vance converted for very, the right reasons or whatever. But
I'm not so sure.
I'll let him answer those questions himself. But it's certainly become a way to get ahead. With all of this money and with Republican politics being so influenced by this kind of cabal of ultra radical Catholics at the heart of Washington, getting ahead, being converting to Catholicism has become a great career move. And over and certainly JD, I'm not aware of any direct links with Opus Dei, but he's certainly very close to Kevin Roberts, who, as we were saying before, gets his spiritual direction from the Opus Dei Center in Central Washington. JD Vance is also close to Peter Thiel, who, while I believe he isn't a member of Opus Dei, but he was close for many years to an Opus Dei priest out in Silicon Valley. So, and JD Vance is also part of the Leo network, this thing called Teneo Network, which is basically a kind of federalist society for everything. They want to basically reshape American culture, entertainment, business, universities, so he's operating within this orbit. And so, the points of contact are various.
Just a quick question. What about Josh Hawley? Did Josh Hawley come across in any of your research? Because he's obviously close with Leonard Leo. There was a scandal in like the sports world where the kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs, Harrison Butker, gave this incredibly misogynistic speech at this small Catholic university that Leo has donated to. There seem to be some connections between the Senator Hawley and this and Leonard Leo, at least.
I'm afraid his name hasn't come up in my investigation. But what I should say is that I think my book, is groundbreaking in many ways. But it just scratches the surface. There is so much more reporting and digging to be done. And what I hope my book does is inspire investigative journalists out there to really kind of start to dig deeper, because there's only so much one guy in London can do. It's there's a lot more work to be done here.
What do you think accounts for that? Because like I say, I remember 16 years ago, coming across people who were starting to write about this. I remember Robert Novak was considered, in the Scalia, and I think it was maybe like the rise of Scalia. I knew Kudlow prior to, I must have known back then. I mean, because I knew Kudlow was Opus Dei. I know at times like Roth Dathau, who writes for the New York Times, he was writing about Opus Dei a little bit. I'm not so sure how critically back in the day. Like Rupert Murdoch supposedly has some peripheral involvement. But why do you think there has been so little writing about a group of people? I mean, Leonard Leo is, I think, by anybody who understands American politics, particularly over the past, decade, understands just how powerful he is. Where Clarence Thomas is joking that he's the third most powerful person in the country. I think the president's probably number one. I'm not sure who he says is number two, but Leonard Leo is not elected, as you know. And it's sort of fascinating that this has not come up more. What do you think accounts for that?
Well, this all comes back to what we were talking about earlier about the way that these people use religion as a shield. I think, any journalist that tries to criticize these people are accused, like me, of being anti-Catholic and of being bigots and the rest of it. And I think I hate this phrase, but the mainstream media, I think, is terrified of being labeled as that. And so I think religion, the kind of this intersection of religion and politics, has been a very tricky area to navigate for the mainstream media. I think there have been a number of great authors out there who've been writing about the rise of Christian nationalism, but it's been written about very little by the big newspapers and covered not a huge amount by the mainstream TV and stuff. And so I think people are. It's just a tricky subject to navigate. Plus, added to that, many of these subjects, Opus Dei, Leonard Leo, these are people who are famously litigious, who will also, they use their financial muscle to silence their critics and to kind of push them to kind of almost cower them into submission and not wanting to report things. I've spoken to a number of reporters who've been on the receiving end of vicious letters from these types of people. And it's, if you're a news organization that's struggling to make ends meet, the last thing you want is some huge lawsuit. So I think it's there's a number of reasons. I think partly a fear of touching religion, but also these people are quite aggressive in the way they fight back.
Gareth Gore, writer, editor based in London. The book is Opus, The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. Fascinating, but also, to be honest with you, a little disturbing stuff.
Thank you both for having me. Have a great day.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.